These are ways that you can maybe manipulate is not the right word, but optimize the 3508 forgiveness options to suit your situation best. Okay. So the 3508 does allow us some selections that we can choose to, and we can use these strategically to choose what's best for us in the more optimal position. So the first is that you can choose your look back period. So when we're comparing full-time employees or full-time equivalents, we look at the average over the covered period, and we can compare that to certain look back periods. We can look back and say January 1 to February 29th of this year, how many FTEs were in that period? Or we can say February 15th to, I believe it's June 30th of last year, how many FTEs were in that period? So this can be helpful for you. Let's say you were in a growth pattern between 2019 and 2020. Let's say you had 80 FTEs last year during the last year's look back period, but you grew to 120 at the beginning of 2020, but you had to reduce down to 100 during the covered period of your loan. So if that's the case, you could say, well, it doesn't actually help me. It looks like I reduced too much headcount if I compare it to January, but if I compare it to last year, it looks like I have way more FTEs. So I'm good. And so that's where one of the places that you can optimize that, that selection. The other way, another kind of helpful way to do this is, or a selection that you have two options for calculating how you look at your FTEs. You can either do a simple calculation, which is kind of what we would probably all think. We take average hours, we divide it by 40, because we use 40 as a full work week for the purposes of the PPP. And then you round it to the nearest 10th. So that would be so you might get, a 0.3, a 0.6, a 0.7 FTE. Now, the SBA has offered another option, and this has been helpful for a lot of people. You can use a simplified version that says, if you have a loan over, or if you have an employee who works over 40 hours on the regular, then they're 1 FTE. If they work under 40 hours on the regular, they're a half. Doesn't matter if they work 2 hours or they work 38 hours, but if they're always working under 40, they're a half FTE. Okay. So this can be used very strategically, because if you needed to restore employees, you could potentially restore them. If they're a half FTE, you could consider, okay, if they were a half FTE before, maybe they had 30 hours on the regular, but I don't necessarily need to give them 30 hours to still get my half FTE back. Okay. So they could maybe only have 5 or 10 hours on the regular on their schedule once they're restored. I also have on here the FTE reduction exemptions. That's the previous slide that we talked about, like going line by line through employees. That is really helpful for people, and it really will help you kind of reclaim a lot of dollars back on your PPP if you take the time to do that exercise. And then the last thing I want to just mention is that remember that you do have the option to opt in to 8 weeks. Most people are using the 24-week covered period because it was, an option, and okay, now we have longer time to spend the money. However, depending on what's been happening in your business, if your business had a slow decline across the rest of 2020, then maybe your FTE count is so reduced that you're not going to be able to achieve as much forgiveness as if you had just cut it off as of 8 weeks. So if you are concerned about that and you did have that kind of lag after the original 8 weeks, you might want to consider just saying, okay, well, what would it look like if I did choose the 8-week period? And you might be able to achieve more forgiveness that way.